In response to Israel allowing minimal quantities of aid into the Gaza Strip, there have been a handful of countries who have come out and said, we're not buying it. So first few aid trucks enter Gaza, but allies threaten Israel with sanctions and urge more. This is going to be clipped separately, but the reason why Israel is allowing aid into Gaza, as admitted by Netanyahu and Bezalel Smotrich, is because they want the Western allies to remain in their pocket, and they feel like they will not get adequate support as long as images of starving children pervade online. However, the first few aid trucks entered Gaza on Monday following nearly 3 months of Israel's blockade of food, medicine, and other supplies. Israel and the United Nations said, as Israel acknowledged growing pressure from allies, including the United States. The UN humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, called it a welcome development, but described the trucks as a drop in the ocean of what is urgently needed. Food security experts last week warned of famine in Gaza. During the latest ceasefire that Israel ended in March, some 600 aid trucks entered Gaza each day. Shortly after Israel announced the first trucks entered Gaza, the UK, France, and Canada issued a sharply worded joint statement calling the aid wholly inadequate. They threatened concrete actions against Israel, including sanctions for its activities in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, and called on Israel to stop its egregious new military actions in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the joint statement and called it a huge prize for the genocidal attack on Israel on October 7th. The statement by France, Canada, and the UK marked one of their most significant criticisms of Israel's handling of the war in Gaza and Israel's actions in the occupied West Bank. We oppose any attempt to expand settlements in the West Bank, the three countries said, calling them illegal. The countries said they have always supported Israel's right to defend itself against terrorism, but called the military escalation in Gaza disproportionate. The countries earlier criticized the new U.S.-backed proposal for aid delivery in Gaza, saying it would not align with humanitarian law. And today, the UK went a step further and suspended free trade talks with Israel. They also announced sanctions over West Bank settlers. The British government ramped up its criticism of Israel's military offensive in Gaza by suspending free trade talks Tuesday and hitting West Bank settlers with sanctions. The moves came as international pressure mounts on Israel following a nearly 3-month blockade of supplies into Gaza that led to famine warnings. It led to famine, not just famine warnings, but famine. Even the United States, a staunch ally of Israel, has voiced concerns over the growing hunger crisis. Foreign Secretary David Lammy described the situation in Gaza as abominable and said that while an existing trade agreement was in place, the government couldn't continue discussions with an Israeli government pursuing what he called egregious policies in the West Bank and Gaza. The world is judging, Lammy said. History will judge them, blocking aid, expanding the war, dismissing the concerns of your friends and partners. This is indefensible, and it must stop. The actions came a day after the UK, France, and Canada issued a joint statement condemning Israel's handling of the war in Gaza and its actions in the occupied West Bank. Israel's ambassador to the UK, Zippy Hatavali, was summoned to the Foreign Office on Tuesday, where Middle East Minister Hamish Falconer...
Ambassador and vaudeville aficionado.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yes. Where Middle East Minister Hamish Falconer planned to call the 11-week blockade of Gaza cruel and indefensible. Lammy announced that in addition to previous sanctions imposed by the UK, it was now imposing sanctions on a further 3 individuals, 2 illegal settler outposts, and 2 organizations supporting violence against the Palestinian community. He said the illegal Israeli settlements were spreading across the West Bank with the explicit support of this Israeli government. Lammy's remarks followed those of Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who said the suffering by children in Gaza was utterly intolerable and repeated his call for a ceasefire. I want to put on record that today we're horrified by the escalation from Israel, Starmer said. Now, whenever something like this happens, I like to cover it not for the purpose of giving these government officials any credit, but for the purpose of giving us in the activist space the credit that I think we deserve for forcing these things. Because this was Keir Starmer right after October 7th, saying that the Israelis were, of course, justified in cutting off electricity and water to the entire Gaza population.
Israel must have that, does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law.
Well, you can't deny a civilian population water under
Yeah,
international
it's literally
law.
a war crime.
Yeah, that is
and he's a lawyer.
possible. Yes. That is a contradiction in terms, my friend. But how far we've come in terms of public opinion and public pressure. One of the reasons we think why Israel in its current form is not long for the world is because of the isolation that they will face economically. So suspending free trade agreements is one step, but it's a big step. Like this has to happen over and over again. And the fact that the UK is talking like that is pretty important since they are one of the worst offenders in the world next to us. Nobody holds a candle to us, obviously, but they are pretty bad. They are pretty bad. And so for them to talk about suspending trade relationships, economic relationships, sanctioning the settlers, that's a big step. And that's a step that they were obviously forced into. If you look at Keir Starmer, that was just a year and a half ago. He had no problem saying, yeah, they have the right to cut off water to the civilian population.
Right.
So, I mean, you can believe he's had a coming to Jesus, or you can believe that the groundswell of activism has made a difference. And I think the latter is far more true than the former. These people are just amoral, just reptilian actors. They don't like Keir Starmer just strikes me just as Joe Biden does. Someone who does not have a human concern in the world for any of these people. But he has political instinct. That's why he is where he is. And to me, this is clearly a response to a shift in attitudes at the rank and file. I think that is what explains this. I think that's what explains the fact that Canada and France signed on. Mark Carney's a Zionist.
Right.
Justin Trudeau was a Zionist. He said, yeah, I'm a proud Zionist. At a certain point, you can move things. You can move things if you stick to it and if you don't get defeated. If the Palestinians in the West Bank can go out every week and protest for their land, as was featured in the No Other Land movie, then yeah, we can stick to it here, and it might look fruitless in the moment. But as we've seen a few different times, even if it seems fruitless in the moment, it can have payoffs later on. When Rashida Tlaib accused the Michigan Attorney General of bias. Well, that meant nothing for 6 months. And then it all of a sudden meant something because a situation arose where if she continued prosecuting the case, it would demonstrate clear bias since Jewish groups were egging her on to do it. So she had to call the case off, right? So even if it looks hopeless in the moment, if you stick to it, you can put wins on the board. And I think this is one of them.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were doing that segment about I was there last February for the Assange thing. That was just last year. And you remember I actually got footage and it became a big story about how they were accusing them of projecting anti-Semitic slogans onto Big Ben. And when you looked at what they said, it was free Palestine.
Stop bombing Gaza. That was
Stop bombing Gaza. It was like crazy to accuse them of anti-Semitism for the things that were actually there. So yeah, I mean that's only a little over a year ago that I was there, and that was the tenor of the conversation in England. Hopefully they'll stop arresting Richard Medhurst now, and the other journalists that they've been arresting for this. I have, as hard as it is sometimes to maintain faith in the darkest moment. Hey, you want to talk about the effect of activism? Julian Assange is free, right?
Exactly.
In the end, you're absolutely right. And this is why I have believed throughout this In the end, this is the end of Israel. They just don't know it yet. Israel as an apartheid state is going to be destroyed as a consequence of the global backlash against what they're doing now. They are never again, they are assuming, and you know a lot about a culture by what they have a word for, right? People always observe, the Germans have Schadenfreude, right? Taking joy in someone's pain says something that you have a word for that.
Right.
The Israelis have a word that translates literally as establishing facts in the field.
Right.
It's essentially the same as our phrase, better to ask forgiveness than permission. That is what they're trying to do here. That is what they're trying to do here. They're trying to make the complete genocide and ethnic cleansing of greater Israel, as they see it, a fait accompli, with the assumption that the world will get over it.
Right.
That once it's done, it's going to be like the Native Americans, they'll put up a plaque, but we'll have greater Israel. It's not going to play out that way. This is not the 19th century. They're never going to be able to get out from under the stigma of this. And at that point, and this is what I keep saying, the Israelis are not going to live in an economically desolated country with no opportunity. And that is what Israel is going to become. You already have enormous brain drain. You have mass bankruptcies. Tourism will never come back. And this is just the beginning. Eliminating these kinds of trade agreements. You're going to see more and more sanctions. They're going to scream louder and louder about how the world is anti-Semitic. It's a very self-fulfilling prophecy at this point. And they're going to collapse.
Hey, thanks for watching our video. We're currently raising money to produce our documentary film on the Uhuru movement. Go to givesendgo.com/do dissidents to chip in.
Every dollar you give goes towards the project. We do not take any kind of salary on these. We mostly live on Gatorade when we're on the road, so even solid food is iffy, just enough to get by. But we do not take any pay for this. Every dollar actually goes into what we need to shoot the project. The Uhuru movement is a subject that really deserves more exposure. Everybody heard about it through the court case, and that was an important thing to elevate. But they've done incredible community work demonstrating a different way that is socialist and not dependent on the government at the same time, which a lot of people don't even realize that still exists in the tradition of the Black Panther food and education programs. And to show there is such a strong community like that with such strong leadership is really important, particularly at this historical moment.
Yeah, so we're really excited about doing the project, but we need your help. So go to givesendgo.com/do dissidents to chip in. Thanks very much for your support.
Please clap.